Hi, Karen. Thank you for joining me today on the College Advisor YouTube channel. I really am excited to have you here, and I've known you for a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
And you've been helpful to a lot of people that I know. So I thought you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and just how did you get into the field that you're in and specializing in testing and all of that.
Okay. Hi, Hilary. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for asking me to be a part of your YouTube channel. I'm very excited. First time I've ever done this. So let's see how it goes.
Okay.
Anyway, so my background. Let's see. So I will just quickly go back. I have my psychology degree from UC Irvine. That was in clinical psychology. Took a year off and worked at a bank, and decided that business. I didn't think the business world was a really good fit for me. So,
Thank
in
goodness.
consultation, yeah, right. Things happen for a reason. But in consultation with my dad, who really was always interested in psychology, and he did a lot of kind of self-help sort of seminars and workshops. He encouraged me. He said, I really, think maybe you should go on for your master's. And so decided to do that. And I went to Pepperdine for my master's. And while I was in the program, just loved it and made a lot of good friends. And everyone seemed to be going on the path of going on for their doctoral degree. And I thought, well, why not?
Why not?
So I did that. And I do have to say, I was fortunate enough to have my parents supporting me, both emotionally and financially through that
Right,
process.
right.
So I'm very, very grateful to this day to them. But I went on and throughout throughout the doctoral program, you do quite a bit of clinical training as part of the program. So early on, I just really gravitated towards working with children and teenagers. That was just my niche. I just really
Sure.
enjoyed those they're called practicum placements, and
Right.
they make you sort of do some adult placements, but I really really prefer to do working with children. So, and through that process, excuse me, I did take some testing courses and testing practicum. So I did a wonderful testing practicum or assessment at Harbor UCLA. And
Okay.
that's what sort of sparked my interest in doing assessment. And even they didn't really have a rotation or like a emphasis in my doctoral program for that. But I was so glad that I had that exposure
Right.
because so as a psychologist, once I graduated, um, I continued to just do my residency and my externships in child psychology with an emphasis in assessment. Whereas when I went on and opened my private practice later, I came to find out that a lot of psychologists do not always do assessment. They don't always like it.
Right.
So they kind of stay with therapy. And I just, in my earlier years, continued to do both. I did therapy and assessment.
Right.
So it probably was, I would say I was probably 10 years into my career where I just realized that there's a need for like a special, like someone going to someone who really specializes in assessment.
Sure. Sure.
And that's sort of, I never looked back after that. I
That's
just, found my niche in the community and I really love it. I
And
really
that's
love assessment.
awesome. That's awesome. And I always like to ask people how they got to where they are because I think that's important. A lot of kids these days feel this pressure to know what they want to do and to be open to different trajectories. And it's okay, it's trial and error sometimes.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
some of the questions I have for you that I've heard as a parent and, working with students, but what what should parents be aware of to know if their child needs to get tested or not? Um,
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And so I think so, oh gosh, doing this for so many years. I think that oftentimes parents think that and understandably don't really think about assessment until a teacher, says to them, hey, I notice, your child's, not always paying attention or a little distractible or struggling with reading or something.
Right.
Um, but so sometimes teachers come to parents, but I think honestly, obviously parents know their children best, and I think they have this nagging like feeling sometimes if something isn't quite right or their child oftentimes is not working to their full potential, something
Right.
seems to be kind of getting in the way. So but I think it can also be a little scary for parents because they don't look we I'm a mom of two children, and nowadays, we I guess the term is neurodivergency,
Right.
and both my kids had some learning and attention challenges. But I have to tell you that I know for sure that my daughter would never had been, the teachers would never have known that anything was going on because she was the compliant girl who sat in the back of class, listened, did what she was told, but she was, just always drifting off and just not, really not attentive.
Right.
Right.
And a
The
lot, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say a lot of times too, I think parents think, oh, they're just being lazy or they're bored, or because as a
Yeah.
parent too, having three kids, you, it's painful to
Yeah.
know that something's wrong with your kid. But what I have found is if you diagnose it and attend to it, you
Yes.
can help remedy the situation. It's never going to go away, but you give them the help that they need.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And I again I have to say, and I've been telling parents this, more and more lately that the at times when I'm testing the younger kids, boys or girls,
Right.
like usually it's the boys that when they're young, they teachers and parents like really see that
Yeah, yeah.
they're struggling to to do what their peers are doing in the classroom. So but I have 5 and 6-year-old boys and girls, but often boys that will even at that age are already saying that they're not smart or they're not, they're
Yeah.
comparing themselves to kids in their class and they're only in kindergarten.
Right.
So it to your point, I think I tell parents, and whether they come to me or anybody else, I'm like,
Sure.
it doesn't hurt to do an assessment. If you have the resources and can do it, do it. Because if it rules out that your child, doesn't have anything, that needs to be attended to, great.
Right.
But more times than not, there is something that can be addressed.
Right.
And as a team with the teacher and parents and maybe some out paraprofessionals in the field, the child does get the help they need.
Right. And I
So,
know there's always a concern, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but nobody wants their kid labeled. And no, I sure didn't,
mhm,
but
mhm,
in the
mhm.
end, I'm so grateful that I did because one of my daughters, actually both got the help that they need, and now they're in college and thriving and all of that. And that would have never happened. And it's like, I always equate it to physical illness. Your throat hurts, and you think you finally go to the doctor and they give you some medicine or whatever it is, it gets
Right.
better.
Right, right. Absolutely. And I think that again, if something is discovered, then we just help children to understand, first of all, that we all have relative strengths and maybe areas of weakness.
Right,
But we all have unique brains and beautiful brains. But I think that the more we can educate children as to how their brains work and what they need, and
right.
sometimes it's an executive functioning issue that can definitely they can get help for, but it's also helping them be kinder to themselves and not, because nowadays kids are more anxious than ever,
Yeah.
and especially kids who have, different
Other,
challenges when it comes to school. So,
right.
but it doesn't help to beat themselves up. They're already so
No.
self-critical. So,
No. And to think
right,
that you're dumb is the worst because
it's
you're
the
not
worst.
dumb. You're just not thinking the way everybody or the schools are teaching you or whatever it is. So
Exactly,
just,
exactly.
you know, I don't know if this is too a question that's going to require too long of an answer, but maybe in sort of a nutshell, like, or a big nutshell. What does testing involve? And I don't know if this is a separate question, but I know you can request that the schools test you. And so what would be, the difference between having the school test you versus coming to someone like you?
Right. It's again such a good question, and I think that a question that can be confusing for parents for sure.
Mhm.
So this is usually what I how I explain this is that um, I think there's a couple of obviously the benefits to going through the school district if they assess your child. It's a big if,
Yeah,
but is obviously there's no added cost. You don't have to pay for it, right?
right,
And so that is a consideration for many families. And but I think usually if children are achieving at grade level, um, it's harder to get the school to assess your child.
right,
And so a lot of it does, they do use grades as as an indicator, which really is not um appropriate because there's many high achieving children with, we know that children with dyslexia and children with various learning disorders are definitely of average to high average intelligence.
right,
So they are not, and they're working twice as hard as everybody to be able to get those grades.
right.
And schools, the administration does, and teachers, not all, but some don't know what's going on behind the scenes for
Sure.
these families. This is not just on the kid.
Right.
These families, the parents are doing a lot to support their children at home to get those grades.
And
Because
sometimes,
what parent wants their child to get bad grades, right?
no, no. And sometimes parents don't even realize the amount of energy that this kid is putting into. So then they're exhausted trying to sort of make up for it. And then somebody's saying, "Oh, you're lazy." It's
Abs Absolutely. And again, some kids just really masks better in the classroom. What kid wants to, they want to blend in. They don't want to appear like they're struggling, right?
right,
So 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 the point being is that if the teacher's on board and they do feel like oftentimes that the child is really not working at grade level, sometimes they can get the school to do some testing.
right,
The testing, unfortunately, sometimes is a long wait list.
right,
So I think when parents get to that point where they realize they want to do testing, they're kind of eager to do it quickly and not have to wait, sometime, I don't know, 6 to 8 months to a year to get it, to get through the whole process of testing, right?
right,
So
right.
there's that. The other area, and it's just in my practice, I see obviously test a lot of kids and for learning challenges and ADHD. The schools do not diagnose. So they are not going to, if a parent's concerned or the teacher's concerned about attentional issues, hyperactivity, impulsivity, executive functioning challenges,
Right.
the school is not going to diagnose ADHD.
Okay.
So if a parent is really concerned about that, they really do have to go outside of the school for that.
Okay. And then they
And
can
then
take a report from a private
yes,
psychologist and submit it, which
correct.
brings me to my next question. We're
Mhm.
just doing this perfect
Mhm.
segues, Karen. Um, there's a difference between getting an IEP, which is an individualized educational plan, versus a 504.
Right.
Could you explain a little bit of the difference?
Yes, yes, for sure. So the 504 was really developed by the educational the law, the Disabilities Act. Um, the 504 is really developed for children with ADHD. It
Okay.
is more for because a lot of ADHD children really don't need changes to the curriculum. They would benefit from some just accommodations, so like
Like,
extended testing time or having access to teachers' notes, things like that. The
okay.
IEP is really meant for children with diagnosed learning disorders.
Okay.
But even then, like I said earlier, many kids with learning disorders don't need the IEP is helpful and there for them, but a lot of them they don't need special education.
Right.
And so the IEP really was developed for children who need special education services. So again, ADHD children often are not going to fall into that. They're not going to need an IEP.
Okay.
Um, and then the other wonderful thing about a 504 is that the 504 carries through all the way through school, the elementary, middle school, high school, and college. The IEP stops in middle school.
Right. No, I thought it
So
stops in after high
I'm
school.
sorry, high school, I meant to
Yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah.
Right. The
That's what I
IEP
thought.
stops in high school. Thank you.
Right.
High school.
So, I'm working primarily with college bound, not primarily, only college bound kids. And when does a kid how often do they need to be retested to keep their accommodations in general? And then when do you need to get retested to make sure your testing is current so that you can roll it over to colleges?
Right. Okay. So I think the big issue there is whether your child attends a public school or a private school.
Okay.
So okay. I do a lot of testing for some of the private schools in our our community, and they require testing every 3 years,
Okay.
retesting. And a lot of parents, I mean, they do it, but they're like, really, does anything change in 3 years? And I'm like, sometimes, usually not, but the schools require it. So, but if so, so for them, oftentimes if they're testing like their junior, senior year, then their test report is good to go for college,
Okay.
right? But in public schools, they don't retest off, unless they have an IEP, they'll do their every 3-year review. But for a
Right.
504 plan, they usually don't have to retest. But I think it really for college, I you can maybe speak, but I it seems to me that it really depends on the college. Some colleges require like a 3-year, usually that 3-year period,
I
they want to
think
see you
so. I
testing.
think that's typically what they
It's
ask
pretty
for.
typical, the 3 years, right? So if I
Right.
was a parent, I would say probably, no, junior year would be ideal to do the retesting before college,
Right.
in order to just secure, just to know that the accommodations will carry over.
Right, right. No, that's really helpful because I know it gets confusing. I have an IEP, and what does that mean now? I'm going to have a 504, and how does that work? And I
Right.
know from my end, when I'm working with kids who have either of those, I encourage them to transition it to college
Yeah.
because it's brand new situation. You're typically away from home. You're in a whole new environment. College is harder than high school. Nobody's there to remind you. And so maybe a little bit about the process of, in the end, I can't make somebody do it, but they're not going to not get in because of that.
Right, right, right. I do think again having the updated assessment where, like someone like me, I would like really try to make more specific recommendations at this point in their lives and what they would benefit from in college. Then
Right,
they can take that to student services at pretty much any college, right? And
right,
then they have specialists. They have therapists there who can do some executive functioning coaching, or they
right,
can meet. I have a couple of clients in college now where I'm always say, reach out to your advisor, reach out to go to
right,
student services. They're really helpful. They really
right.
can, be of service to kids with different learning
Right.
challenges.
And the difference though too is I hate calling them kids because they're not kids,
I know, me too.
but they also have to initiate it. It's not at a school where it comes in your record and ideally the teacher knows that. You have to
No,
go to your professor and say, "Hey,
yep, yep. And that's something that I definitely the young, yeah, like you're saying, kids, young adults that I'm working with too. As early as possible. I really, really suggest they learn how to self-advocate because to your point, in college, no one's going to come knocking on their door asking what they need. They
no."
have to feel comfortable and confident asking for what they, need in school to be successful.
Right.
Um, and for some people, that's hard. It just is,
It is.
and it's not that they don't think they need it. It's just, I don't know, like they just being assertive, and there's just certain skills that, that they need to be, advocates for themselves. So that's some of the work they can do prior to college, with a
Right.
therapist or,
Or
you know,
maybe something a parent can help
a
them
parent can,
work towards of,
exactly.
calling and making your own doctor's appointment and things where you have to actually speak to somebody on your own without,
Exactly. And Hillary, the other thing just I might as well just throw in is for parents out there is to, with especially with not there's a lot of overlap and comorbidity between ADHD and learning, challenges or learning disorders. But children, I'll say, with ADHD are 2 to 3 years delayed in their executive functioning skills. So these kids at 17 or 18, some are 17 going off to college, we have to realize they're really
A
a
little
few years
behind.
behind in those skills that you really need to be successful in college.
Okay.
So again, like we're saying, whether it's a coach, whether it's parents working with them on these life skills a little bit before they leave, it's important.
Right. And maybe you can clarify just really quickly, you know, I hear the term executive functioning a lot, and I don't know if everybody necessarily knows what that means.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So executive functioning skills are basically skills you can, be very, very, intelligent or have a high IQ or be bright. And for a lot of students that can get them through school very, well, all the way through high school.
Right.
Um, but I think sometimes parents are not realizing how much they're helping their kids behind the scenes to stay on top of things. So if I had to really, I'll break down executive functioning skills, and there's several of them, but I think the number one executive functioning skill that a lot of, people with ADHD have is task initiation. So it's like getting started on things in a timely way. So,
Okay.
not putting things off. So it's task initiation or just having motivation to get things done, especially when it's not particularly interesting or something they want to do.
I think we could all
So
use that.
I think we all can. Exactly. But I'll explain to certain, and parents will say, well, isn't that, common for all of us? I said, and it can be, but it's really, really hard for kids with ADHD to motivate. And that has to, again, it has to do with brain functioning and specifically the chemical dopamine, which is, not synapsing the same way in ADHD brains. So, and I can get into like that, get real
That's
specific,
okay.
but I won't. But basically, it has to do with dopamine and neurotransmitters. So again, motivation is an executive functioning skill, task initiation, time management, um, prioritization,
Uh-huh.
working memory, emotional regulation. So think about, being able to do tasks and just being able to manage anxiety and frustration,
Sure.
having that emotional control. Working memory is just, again, being able to, it's that very, very, it's shorter than short-term memory. It's holding on to information so that we can manipulate and get things done.
Right.
I think, and then again, procrastination. A lot of people with ADHD procrastinate to the last minute to get
Okay.
things done. And that works for them, but it causes a lot of stress and anxiety.
Okay.
So these are executive functioning skills that, again, if parents and coaches or teachers, can help students with these skills, it's really, really important. I really do wish that probably starting in middle school, I wish that they would do an executive functioning course for all kids, make it
Right.
mandatory.
Right. I think that's helpful just in general. I have another video with a professional organizer, Michelle Vieira, and she talks about, we all say to kids, oh, get organized, organize yourself, work smarter. We're telling them that, but they don't know what that means. Sometimes
No,
adults don't know what that means. And so you have to
exactly.
actually give them the
Yeah,
sort of curriculum, for a lack of better words. What does that really mean?
absolutely. And the curriculum, and also like again, like in a class that, that kids can really, you know, I don't they have like projects or things where it helps them to, a lot of children need like hands-on
Right.
learning opportunities, to really do it, not just hear it.
Right.
So that would be so helpful. But I
I
mean,
know.
executive functioning skills are so, so important for children and adults.
I
And
agree.
and again, with that developmental lag in their brains, some of it is just maturity. Some of it is that it's going to take longer for those skills to really come together
Right.
for these
Especially
students.
the boys.
And the boys are behind anyway. Exactly. And not due to ADHD or
No,
learning
it's
challenges,
the frontal,
development.
everything kind of right when they're going off on their own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
thank you, Karen. Is there anything else that I haven't asked that you think might be helpful information? Or
Gosh, I would, I guess, yeah, I would just say that again, the importance of assessment, is that not only, I mean, most importantly for the child, to help them understand themselves and how to best advocate for themselves if they don't know that they have something underlying a
Right,
learning challenge, or a lot of kids, especially girls, are present to therapy or in school are
right.
very, very anxious when under really there's an underlying attentional or learning challenge. So
Okay,
sometimes just anxiety can be a red flag and a reason to get some help or to get some assessment.
okay,
So that's, I would just say that, and that, you know, um, I think that you're doing your child a favor in the long run, just in life. Like, if they know that they have something, then they know how to advocate. They know what profession might be a good fit for their brains.
right.
There's so many good reasons to do it, and for parents to understand their children better too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you, Karen. This was so helpful. I'm
good.
so
I'm so
grateful
glad.
for you to do this today.
It
And
was fun. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.